Good evening. My name is Gabe Dade, and I'm head of Greenhouse and Gardens and Public Programming with the Delaware Historical Society. And on behalf of the trustees and staff of the Delaware Historical Society, welcome to Growing Business in Delaware, the politics of job creation in the first state. This presentation is the second Contemporary History Series program of 2017, in which we explore modern topics with an historical perspective to spark a healthy discussion. So please see the informational table at the back with materials on DHS's upcoming programs, as well as information on how to become a DHS member for further perks. Also, at the end of the program, please take some time to fill out the evaluation that's on your chair right now. So to introduce tonight's speaker, Mr. Ed Ratledge is a 1972 graduate of the University of Delaware with a BS and MA in economics, and currently is the director of the Center for Applied Demography and Survey Research and associate professor. The center conducts survey research and policy research for a wide range of federal, state, and local government agencies, as well as nonprofits. As a policy fellow and associate professor in the School of Public Policy and Administration, Ed has accumulated more than 30 years of experience working with state and local government at both policy and operational levels. His current work spans a variety of areas, including healthcare, transportation, economic development, and public finance. He was a central figure in the development of the Delaware Health Information Network, which was the first statewide health information exchange in the country. Ed is also a founding member of the Delaware Economic and Financial Advisory Council, which produces all revenue and expenditure forecasts and defines the state budget parameters. He recently served on the Governor's Advisory Council on Revenue and the Expenditure Review Committee, and is currently a member of the Education Funding Improvement Commission. Ed is currently working with William Boyer on a series of books dealing with public policy as practiced in Delaware over the past 50 years. The first volume, Delaware Politics and Government, was published in 2009. The second volume, Pivotal Policies in Delaware, From Desegregation to Deregulation, which examines key policy decisions and associated impacts, was published in January 2014. The third volume, Growing Business in Delaware, The Politics of Job Creation in a Small State, was published in December 2015 and is what will primarily be discussed tonight. The fourth volume, currently under construction, is an analysis of Delaware's public education system and public policies associated with the system. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ed Ratledge.
Good evening. Thanks for coming out. A couple of corrections. I must have been. I've been working on this stuff for 45 years, not for 30. So that's why I look so old. The other important thing is that the education book is finished, and it's being edited by the whoever those people are that we send things to. So we have to get that through. But well, let me start by just introducing my co-conspirator in crime, actually in growing jobs, not crime. That's the thing you're currently working on. So Bill Boyer, take a sign up here. He's Charles P. Messick of public administration and emeritus, and that means he's retired. Except he comes to work every day and all week long for a pittance that I pay, and is currently 93 years old. So now maybe that's just because we like to hang around universities, and it's a good place to be, and it's nice to be able to work. And you do have a memory. One of the things that people need more of is to have memories around here and understand what history is all about. At DFAC meetings, Nancy Cook, one of the senior people doing that, she'd come at the break and say, "Hey, Ed, this stuff to talk about, didn't we do that before?" And that's what you start seeing, is these ideas start circulating around, even though we know what the answer is in many cases. So it's a problem. History is really, really very, very important to us. What I'm going to talk to is a mixture today. It's all about jobs, but part of it is going to be about also the demography of this. And I want to start out with just showing you why some people don't feel like they're. By the way, there's some graphs in this. Okay, I'll try to go through it slowly. They're relatively simple, but they're the only way that you can describe a lot of numbers in a very short piece. So you got two lines here. One of them is green and one is blue. Blue tells you basically the gross domestic product. That is, what's the value of everything produced in this state? Okay, and that's the blue line. The green line adjusts for inflation. And if you look real carefully there, you can see we really haven't done an awful lot since about 2005. You know, it's been relatively flat, and this is, if you look around, you'll find that people complain about not getting pay raises and so forth. A very minor thing, and this is part of what's going on. We've been kind of flatlining over a period of time. The other way to look at that is in terms of disposable income. And I can't get a complete series on this as yet, but you can see that it looks like in the green line that our disposable income, or I'm sorry, personal income is the green line, and disposable income is the blue line. You might notice that it's a little further apart at the top. Somebody else is getting a bigger share of that, so you don't get everything to spend. And then you have this funny little red line in the middle line. That's where I could get a adjustment for prices in the mix. And what that shows you is that also has gotten kind of flat over the last couple of years. So we're just simply not seeing relative incomes increasing at a rapid rate. And that's probably what makes people most disconcerted about this. Now, I'm going to take you back just a little bit. In 1960, I remember it very well. I was in high school back then. And what we can see here in this chart, and what you got is the boys are on the left-hand side in blue, the gals are on the right-hand side in pink, I guess. And what we're showing you is from age 0 to 4 at the bottom group. Kids have been born in the last 5 years, all the way up until you get to 85 and 85 plus. And the things I want you to notice is look at this. You've got about 3 of them down at the first set of bars, basically, are the largest one, right? Who do you think that is? The baby boomers. They're just starting their march through the states, like Sherman marching through Georgia. You know, so they're sitting down there, and there's a lot of them. There's actually more kids then than there are right now, or almost more. And so what we're going to do, one of the things I always tell people, the first thing you want to know about anything is is there any lumps in the distribution, and what it's going to look like as it continues its march through time. And that's a really, really important thing, because they cause a lot of trouble. The boomers started driving the bus in the 1980s. That's that group there. Impact schools, housing, income, gross domestic product. Women joined the labor force in droves, all occurring from the late 60s to 70s into 80s. And by about 1980, it had been pulled together. Now, so if you look at the age distribution in 1980, what do you see? They're moving up there. You also see something below them there. Now the 0 to 4 and 5 to 9 class, what's happening there? There's less of those. This is what we call the baby bust. It's a very important area because all these things are going to happen, and they're going to change over time as this rolls forward through time up to where we are right now. And you can pretty well predict precisely what's going to be going on. So the biggest group at that point was 15 to 19 in 1980, and followed only shortly by the 20 to 24 group. Now, this is going to take a little bit of explaining too. What you've got here, let's say on the left-hand side over here, you've got income in thousands of dollars. So from 0 to $100,000 of income, household income, of the head of household. And you will see the blue line here is tracing basically what that income is by the age groups down at the bottom. So you start under 25, maybe your income's about $30,000 if you got a job. At 25 to 34, it'll move up and maybe it's 58 or so. And then you see it moving down that line, and where's the peak? It's up in just between 45, 54 and 55, 64. Let's call it 51 years. that's when income peaks up for the average person. Okay? So what's going to happen then is right now, in the 80s, we're going to see that big bulge of people move up through that period of time on the ascending part of that income curve. That's what the boomers do. They basically are moving up that line until they hit their 51, which is now 2 years below where they are right now. They're at 53. So they're going to drive that income line, and then what happens, we'll talk about that later, but you can see the shape of it. In the middle, you've got basically wages and salaries, and you'll see as those things, or most of it is wages and salaries in the early years, and then as you go up, you'll have things like Social Security will come in, a pension will come in, that'll be part of your income, so you'll be a gap between that because the people have left the labor force largely. So you have that particular thing going on, and then you've got your expenditure line also it's not as sharply shaped, but it's also rose up here in the beginning parts of the age group, up say for 35 to 44, and then shortly after, somewhere at the early 50s, it starts to fall. Don't have as much money to spend on things. Maybe you're saving a little bit more. Hopefully you're saving a little bit more for retirement or whatever. And let me just say this. If somebody has a question, you can interrupt me at any time. Okay? And so otherwise I'll get a little long at times. So, and it's always easier when we're looking and saying, well, what the hell is that green line doing there? Okay, I'm not going to go down the housing. You can see is kind of a flat line, or in that sense. The others are a little too complicated to deal with. So that's an important thing. They're not only moving up through the age structure, they're moving up through the income structure as well, which means that they will be buying more stuff. And when you buy more stuff, what happens to the economy? It grows. Okay? You buy less stuff, it doesn't grow as fast. So, and that's purely a function of age and income. Now, there are two things on this chart that are like there's something called a labor force participation rate. If you lined everybody up here between 16 and 10,000, up where Bill is, and counted how many of those people are actually in the labor force. And this is the number you would get. So you start in 1977, the chart starts, and it's about 64, is the 64% of the people in the labor force. Now, well, you're seeing that during the 70s and 80s, while that climbs up to about 1992. That's basically women joining the labor force. So that more of that 16 to 60 or 16 to whatever is now females, because they're going to go up to a point where they're the same percentage working as the males, and that actually has reversed itself in later times. So that's the lower part of this thing. As you can see, in the middle point, up until about the time of the recession, and I'll come back to this in a few minutes, you'll see it stayed right around that 70% line. And I'm sure most of you saw where it's headed, and I'll come back to this in just a second. The red line, by the way, is unemployment, and we haven't really seen, well, we just did see some numbers the first time. We had a 10% rate in 2010, and in the recession, the bad recession we had in 1980-82 was also a very serious situation too. Okay, so one of the in Delaware, the standard for economic development plans is a Financial Center Development Act. Have anybody ever heard of that? Well, in 1982, a lot of the states, in fact, most of them had caps on the level of the interest rates that you could charge on credit cards and other types of loans. There's a cap. Well, we have some pretty smart lawyers in the state of Delaware. We have a lot of lawyers in the state of Delaware. Do I have any lawyers in the House? I guess they're not historians then. So you have, it was basically an opening. And this is an important thing not only for Delaware, but what it indicates is when you have something in the law that's suppressing something, there is always a possibility that you may be able to release that by being clever. So in 1982, a lot of people claim credit for this, but I think Frank Biondi was one of the central players, if you remember him. And he got together with some of the banks in New York, and they say, all right, what can we write here that we could get rid of this, and then we could get you to move your operations to Delaware. And had to write legislation, one that would allow out-of-state banks to open up here, first of all, not to the customers on the street, okay, but they could operate here and move their money through and park it or whatever we're doing with it, issue your credit cards here, and so forth. And then came a problem. We have something called a bank franchise tax here, which is like 8.7%, which all the regular banks pay. Well, they were not going to pay 8.7% if they're bringing billions here. Well, so we had to fix the law in order to do that, which gave them what we would call the regressive rate. The more the income you have, the lower the rate was, and over 20, I think it was over 25 million. So that came into play, and they worked a number of pieces around to make that suitable for the banks, and they kind of wandered down here. And they've come in, some have left, most of them that came here in the beginning stayed. One of them, and you probably will know the name of Mr. Lerner and Mr. Cawley, who sat out there in the, down in Newark at the V of 4 and 273 in an old I think it was an A&P food store, and they came up with the pieces of MB&A at that point, and grew from roughly 3 people to 14,000 employees in 2005 or 6, before they basically decided to exit Delaware, and it was bought out by Bank of America. And of course, we didn't have 14,000 people after that, so that was a bit of a shock that came right on top of the 2007 collapse, 2007-2008 collapse as well. So, but it's a very important thing in that it wasn't a question really of doling out millions of dollars to somebody to come here, but setting up an environment for them to come. Now that can be done in a number of ways. We'll see in a little bit what kinds of things that they do. But this is the one that all worked, and everybody remembers, because as an economic development plan, it worked. The only trouble is it doesn't occur as often as you would like. So we have not had a second go-around. We tried in the insurance industry, a couple of others that just escaped me at this point, but none of them were really anywhere near the success that was. So we here in the 80s, banks were expanding rapidly. We added 10,000 people. Ultimately, it gets to 45,000 in that order of magnitude of the financial sector. DuPont employed 26,000 people. That includes their contractors, 26,000. You had Hercules was close to 3,000 at its peak, and we had 5,000 people working at Chrysler, and 5,600 and 5,000 working in General Motors. Those were different. Those were very, very different times, and that hung on for some time. But it was already starting to drop. That was just about the peak. Was in 1986. And one of the things that you can see in just in the short run of this, if you look at that blue line, which is up for about 47,000 back here in 2000. I didn't have the data to stretch it because there's changes in the way you counted these things. So you can see that that financial sector has actually behaved on a more stabilized approach than any of the others. And you do see it falling if you go down to 2010, 11, 12, 13. You can see some drop off there, and then it comes back. I'll talk about that in a little bit also. You saw in the middle line, we got manufacturing. You saw manufacturing has been declining, at least in its employment, levels. And then it started to shallow out some in this other one. Everybody calls for about manufacturing. Talk about manufacturing employment. There's nothing wrong with manufacturing output in this country. It's high, as high as it's ever been. It's far past where it was in 2008 sector. So the problem is it's all being done with companies which have 25 people in a machine. And so it's a different kind of animal today than it was recently. One of the big hits in that more recent one, as you can see, the bottom line is the construction industry. So the construction industry, in 2003 started taking, followed the housing boom up to 2006. That was the fourth quarter of 2006, the housing market started to collapse, so it didn't show up in a recession until 2008. And if you see very clearly there that the construction business has really not recovered since the downtake. So that was a lot of well-paying jobs in that particular sector, and it's just it's hard to see how it's going to recover finally. Some of this the downward move there was a fair number of Hispanic workers in that particular field, and they just left. They either went south to other places where the construction industry was a lot better. So but it's something to remember, and I'll come back to this in another minute. So we have the vanishing, once promising Pharmaceutical Sector. And correct me if I misstate this, Bill. It's 98, 99. We had Zeneca here, and Astra was over in Pennsylvania. And between them, they had about 4,000 people at that stage. So the issue was what was going to happen with the merger, and where would the headquarters be located. And Delaware won that one. In other words, they did that, and so it reached maybe even a little over 4,800. Just depends on who you believe in that. Some people said it went to 5,300. And so we expected the pharmaceutical sector really to expand significantly over time, another sector-based approach. And a biotech center, which is going to be with DuPont, as well as a couple of other companies, was another issue. Now, one of the things we did for AstraZeneca is we spent about 200, if everybody remembers what 202 used to look like, and we spent $200 million improving that piece of roadway up there. Fortunately for Jamie Dimon and his friends at J.P. Morgan, they get to use it every day now for that group. So $200 million for that, and we donated a very expensive piece of land to AstraZeneca to build on as well. And of course, then what happened was DuPont shed its pharmaceutical arm, which was Merck, at that point, and AstraZeneca began to shrink. And it was one of these things where basically their drugs ran out, went into the other state where somebody could compete with them, and they lost markets. They didn't have a new product to put out there. They've recovered somewhat, but in the meantime, basically they just shifted a lot of their operations back to Europe, and everybody was left here holding the bag. So we didn't even get, I'm comparing this basically what the Financial Center Development Act then is expanded, has lasted 30 years, and it still, has positive movement on top, where this trying to guess what the market's going to be in a pharmaceutical area is not an easy thing to do. And you're never sure because you don't know what the competitors are doing, you don't know what people actually need, you don't know how long your currently protected pharmaceuticals are going to be there for you. So there's, at the end of the day, one of the things we did, markets are driving the development bus. You never know when you try to bring somebody in here where they're going to turn around and eventually leave. We had this group out at the Star campus. What's her name? I'm trying to think, but the fairly 120, 130 people, and the next thing you know, less than 2 years down the line, half of them disappear. So whatever was the product didn't work out. So you get that you are always at the mercy of the marketplace, and whether you're the leader or not the leader. And you can see what happens in the technology. And let's tell you, software lasts about 3 years now, if that. And so you may think you have a sharp product when you're a new app, and this thing is going to last forever. Well, 3 years down the line, you're probably dead. So that's you have to continually take R&D as well. That's a lesson which I'll repeat again. Then we had, I call it conflicting goals in economic development. Renewables are in and fossil fuels are out. You've heard that, right? Well, we thought then we had this European firm called Fisker. And Fisker's was going to save Delaware. We had an empty plant sitting over on Boxwood Road. Once had 5,000 people working there. Most recently about 1,200, and now empty. And what we did for Fisker is we gave them about $30 million, $9 million in utilities, which we couldn't get anything back, and $21 million in cash, or a theoretical loan in there, but it was an uncollectible loan. Let's put it that way. And the feds, thank you for our congressional delegation, managed to come up with $193 million from the Department of Energy. They were going to give them another $300 million too, but that was amazing. I mean, just watch this, and you sit there and scratch your head. What do these people know that I don't know? So I'm thinking, well, we know what it is. It's electric car. They don't have one that works very well at that point. They had the Karma. I think they introduced it in Europe, but then their batteries blew up, and fires, and I think they ended up being underwater at one point in time. It was not a story that engendered a lot of confidence. But so the result of that was no cars, no employment, and no clawback, bankrupt. It was a very, you look at this thing, you say, well, sometimes this stuff has got to work, this stuff with these no fossil fuel. So we decided to take another shot at it. And fuel cells got to be a big thing. And fuel cells, basically, in this particular case at Bloom, they were all over California at that point in time. And what they do is take a natural gas and convert it chemically to electricity. I don't know what the formula is or how it's done or whatever. They could be wizardry for all I know on that. But I do know one thing. Natural gas is a fossil fuel product. So I'm wondering, how does that happen? Well, we all know how it happens now. The General Assembly writes a bill, and they put it in the statute, said for the purposes of this one case, we're going to call natural gas a renewable energy. Well, I thought that was really clever. It was done in one night. That was another thing that was kind of interesting, and but it's right there in the code if you want to read it. And so that was a good thing was they were going to promise us 900 jobs. Well, the last time the number came out, and of course it kind of built up slowly over time, and then they said they have 200 jobs out there. Nobody knows what they're doing because you can't get in the plan. And there's some expectation of what they're really doing is they're still building all their stuff in California. But whatever it is, somebody's working. I don't know where they came from. They may just be dummies that are sitting in there or something, but some virtual people, possible. So they got 200 jobs. They got land rent from University of Delaware, contribute to land rent. Good, we're happy to do that. City of Newark got to cover their utilities. That's a wonderful deal. And the ratepayers get to pay a monthly surcharge of between $6 and $30 a month for the privilege of using their fossil fuel-free thing. I'll tell you now. I have to full disclosure here. $30 was my bill, and still is my bill, because what they do, and I know a lot about this. When the heating season, or the cooling season ends. The only thing left is the heating system. So we have to carry it over the winter time, the full load for Bloom on that time. So they raise our rates from the $6 up to, in my case, $30. And I have one of the most fuel-efficient houses there ever was, I think. In any event, we also get the privilege of using power from the polluting fuel cells for 20 years. 20 years, they'll be getting this money. So that's another economic development decision made by our representatives in Dover. Most of them don't admit it anymore. And then we have the interesting case of people. Yes, sir.
I'll admit it.
Well, Dennis was one of the hostages down there for many, 6 years?
Yes.
Yeah. It's hard sometimes because, well, we saw that in the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, where the people never even read the bill. Well, some of that actually happens in the General Assembly as well. And they don't read the budget either. I could go on forever on this. Unfortunately, that's the first thing I read after the budget comes out. I go to the epilogue language and see what kind of stuff they put stuffed in there this time. Because otherwise you never hear about it. There's always, it's all interesting. And so in any event, we have our other problem down there. I don't think it's necessarily a problem. PBF, or the Getty Motivi Primor Valero PBF Delaware City Refinery. It's done pretty well. They put up $450 million in it to rebuild it. Now there's an interesting case. A private company puts up the money. I mean, this is striking. So they actually get the thing back to work, and 1,000 people roughly work out of there, both contractors and full-time employees on that thing. But we didn't know we were going to have a rail car exchange process over there. Have you all seen the cars that are over there, or have you been stuck with them on the highway? It's kind of fun. But they're one of the few places for years and years and years, while the other firms had it. They were processing heavy crude from South America, and that was its big claim to fame, as far as I could see. So what they do now is they take the oil from the Bakken parts of North Dakota, and the oil sands in Canada, which some of it is like as thick as tar in those things. So I heard some stories about how they have to soften that up too, which is kind of interesting. So we have that, and then of course they all operate a barge business too, running at night with no lights on the river, moving it over to Paul Street and other places. Well, that's a theory, it's not a proven fact. So then, and the other thing they do is they like to battle with DENREC. DENREC likes to plop them with a fine periodically and said they can't do something, but eventually they get to do it anyway. So I just want to tell you, in spite of the law that did you vote on that? Do you remember voting on it? I think you were there.
For Fisker and Bloom. I don't remember what the deal was with PBF at the time.
Well, they do a pretty good job. And now, of course, then the Coastal Zone Act appears after 60 years or whatever it's been there, and because there are things that they want to do on the bulk storage to be able to move product that's coming in rail, move it over to Paulsboro and one or two of the others along the way too, and of course that gets a lot of people upset. I don't really have an axe to grind in that particular case. As long as whatever they do, they got to clean it up. If they do anything wrong, they have to go clean it up and they have to pay the fine. So whatever. I'm kind of split on that particular issue. It's an important one to the entire state too, in terms of production of gasoline. It's like they have about 75 to 80% of the gasoline is actually made there. It's distributed a bunch of whole different. There are many companies within Delaware which says BP, or it says, I don't know who, Texaco, are they still in business? Exxon or something like that, but it all comes out of Delaware City with appropriate additives and so forth. So it's a big gasoline mix that's important to us. Now, let me, two other kind of areas in there where we spend a lot of time on the book in the Port of Wilmington, looking at that, which is obviously in the news also. From what I can see, there's at least 3 other ports or expansions on the Delaware River that people are trying to get there. And they have one thing in common. They have no money. And what they have, the idea was, after they rated, what's the number for the, let's see, 91 million they brought up, gave to, it's a long-term payment, 91 million over 30 years to Wilmington for the port, and 177 million that they put into it since the purchase, and it still never makes a dime. It's small. If you look at what Baltimore does or what Philadelphia does, they're up in 6,400 roughly million tons, which is a lot of tons, and we're at 1 million tons. We're a very small player on that. So sometimes I don't know enough about the mechanics. I know that they're dredging the river even now, but we'd have to have something way out towards that point where you would then there might be some advantage to offloading here in Wilmington versus one of the other 2 places. So it's just hard to calculate what the probabilities were of doing that. Now we did have, the governor came up with a good, this was Governor Markell, said we need to get this into be a more business-like proposition. So why don't we go get an operator for the port instead of just having our board of politicians that sit on that and a couple of union people and things of that. We're going to go out there and get an operator, and found one. Kinder Morgan came in, put up his proposals, modified his proposals, negotiated this, negotiated that, and the General Assembly said, we ain't doing it. Were you there?
I was going to comment on this one briefly, and I agree with pretty much everything else you said up to this point. I was one of the 2 or 3 leaders in killing the Kinder Morgan deal. And the reason is this. The port actually made money before depreciation. The General Assembly, the state, was putting in between $5 to $10 million a year for capital expenses. But on an ongoing basis, the port made money. What was not taken into consideration was the fact that
The place is falling down.
well, no, between all of the employees and the businesses that were located there, the port generated roughly $27 million in tax revenue every year because it was very, very labor intensive. It's primarily a fruit port. It's the largest importer of bananas on the East Coast. A lot of fruit, very, very labor intensive. The Kinder Morgan deal was going to bring in bulk coal and a lot of things like that, which would not be appropriate to have in the same location as fruit. So Dole and Chiquita and all those were going to leave if Kinder Morgan got that. What they were going to do was bring in large volumes, hire 17 people to wheel up a conveyor belt and unload it. So the tax revenue from that would have decreased drastically. On top of that, and I'll stop after this, on top of that, being in contact with several of the employers there, the volume of wage garnishments for the employees at the Port of Wilmington is exceedingly high. Child support and things like that. Not only would you lose the tax revenue, but huge numbers of families in the city and surrounding areas would have been affected, and Medicaid and welfare rolls would have grown drastically had those employees lost their jobs. So I proudly will say I helped kill that. It was a very bad deal, and we were going to get pennies on the dollar. They could have closed, sold the assets, and made a huge profit.
Well, ignoring depreciation is not a good thing to do either, because the place starts falling apart. Yes, sir.
So therefore, what killed the deal was the lack of the employment multiplier was much lower for the Kinder Morgan deal.
Correct. It was drastically lower.
Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
And no one ever really got a real story on, this deal didn't make sense on so many levels. Someone was making out of this deal, and it wasn't the state.
Well, in any event, what happened, I just would say as an observer from afar, politics of job creation took over in this particular case. And I think that the governor got worked over pretty good on that by his own party for all practical thing. But the problem is you needed somebody that also could get resources in there. Not state resources, real resources from private investors. And that never occurred and hasn't occurred yet. They've been shopping an area just south of the bridge down there for a new port, and they don't have the money to do that. I don't see anybody, even with the expansion, which is possible there, that who's going to put the money up for that? I don't know. Our strategic fund is down to $10 million the last time I checked. So it's, there's not a lot of money to do anything of that sort. And the last time I checked, there's a little shortage of revenue down there as well. So, which is not funny. So you've got it's a port. You've got it there. It has at least a utility, but they still have the problem of the silting of the Christina on there for the offloading issue too.
It does have to be dredged, but one solution is to build out onto the Delaware River. And there were funds made available to do that, and subsequent administration didn't spend the money. So,
I'm sure they found.
but that's why the port south of the bridge won't work, because
I know.
it's the river's 8 foot deep up to the middle of the river. You would have to dredge enough there to.
Can't.
There's nowhere to put it.
We could fill New Jersey with it.
That was my.
All right, let me kind of get to I'm really running behind time here, but I'm enjoying myself anyway. The Riverfront Development Corporation, another one. We've seen them working over the many years, and I see what it said in the law was to promote the common good of the citizens of Delaware, to foster, encourage, and promote recreational, residential, commercial, and industrial development and redevelopment all along the Brandywine and Christina rivers. And they've had at this point, according to my count, the public has provided about $346 million to that. We've returned revenues of $173 million. And those are 2012 numbers. Somebody else has to do some work out there to get the totals. 2,000 jobs created, and $600 million has been invested by private sources. The city of Wilmington has done quite well as a result of the RDC. I can tell you from property taxes and from wage taxes and so forth of people have located down there. And they're on brownfields. I mean, that's the great part of cleaning up brownfields is they got those organizations in there, and they were cleaned up so you don't get into this problem of leaching that occurs if you just leave it in place, and which is another reason that I kind of thought it was a good idea on the new coastal zone thing, which did get out of committee, and I'm not sure whether it passed the House yet or not, but it was close. But see. Is that there's any number of sites over there that could be used, but right now they're just sitting there, which means whatever the pollution is moving, and that's not a good thing. So I think has turned out to be a pretty good idea. So not all the ideas are necessarily bad in Delaware. Most of the companies that grow around here grow without state support, anything at all, and but periodically. Bill will tell you that there's a whole chapter on the potpourri of grants where you find, big companies, real Bank of America, DuPont, so forth, coming in there to get money to retain employment. And that gives me the shivers, but it's not always really clean in some ways, bringing in something that's new. when we think of how that money is spent. So, and we've seen down there IMG, which turned into Capital One, or Capital One took over. Capital One exclusive IMG, the AAA Mid-Atlantic is down there. We got Barclays down there, Chase Center, IMAX, and a lot of other restaurants, condos, apartments. And we have the Walkway, which I'm sure half the people in Delaware have enjoyed using that. So I'm in favor of this just because it was brownfields being reclaimed, and it's a really very, very important issue. Although the current General Assembly is trying basically to take away the money that goes into the brownfields program, which the last time I did a lot, now I have to say, I did a lot of the calculations on this and figured it was worth. And for all practical purposes, the state got $16 back for every dollar they put into subsidizing them to clean the place up in the first place. That seems like it'd be a pretty good rate of return. Now, you know, I argue with the engineers about whether it's the proper way to count it or not, but that's the way I do it. Now, coming through this whole thing, I already mentioned the fact that one of the areas is basically providing cash grants. That's the second, like the other place, they've tried to use it, but as to how to make it attractive to business in the first place, like improve the education system. Still always been a big issue here. To give you the skills for the folks that are going to work for you. Adequate infrastructure. They're hot and cold on this issue, although I tell you, I told them at DFAC the other day, I don't think there are many orange barrels left in the state or in the country. They're not. They're all here in Delaware right now. And the offer good quality of life to employers and employees, appropriate housing, reasonably priced utilities, and government services funded by an equitable tax base. But I'll tell you one thing, most of you probably don't know. A resident here will pay roughly 48% of the tax load for the state. The rest of it is major things like the franchise tax, abandoned property receipts, things like that, which is over $1.2 billion between the two of them. And it's not paid for by individuals. So the really question is, when you look at the cash grants and things like the AZ, Fisker, and Bloom, I use bad examples so they made my case, that just handing out cash sometimes doesn't work very well. Now, I want to shift gears just slightly, and I'll do this reasonably fast. We've been watching the employment is going to, jobs, you need jobs first to be open for somebody to be employed. And basically what I've got here is just showing you what the labor force is, where it's been. It's in a shallow increase, I guess, over that. You can see how rocky it was. That's the dark blue line during the 2008, and it didn't really clean up until 2014. That's how long it took to basically stabilize in the labor force. A lot of the people, obviously the total employment went down and started to recover by 2014, and it still has work to do in that. Participation rates, though, however, that were at 70% in the year 2000 are now down to about 62%. That means a smaller and smaller number of the people here are working of that total 16 to whatever thing. There's a couple reasons for that. Let me just show you this for this, because this is basically current. This is showing those labor force participation rates by age, like 19 to 34. There's the millennials. They were at the start of this period, 2007, they were almost 60%. Right now, they're at 51%. So they're not set. The 35 to 39 is kind of where it's usually been somewhere close to 70%. And then you've got the 50 to 64 group, which is, you start to see retirements and disability and a number of things come into play there. And they're down in the 57 range. The 65 plus group is now at 12%. Might possibly get up to 15% of the group 65 and over. Might get to 15%. So what we've got is a large group of people that are all in this group right now. I'm talking about well over 100,000 people that over the next few years are going to drop from 50-odd% down to 12%. It'll be this is the boomers once again. The boomers are here. The boomers are causing trouble. There's nothing new about that. So, and you can see it here. If you look at the, see where the boomers are right now? They're between roughly 55, 59 down to the 50 to 54 group. And then you see that cutout there, which is the baby bust. So the number of people in the that are going to replace the boomers in the labor market is smaller than the ones that are going to leave us. So that's this is a structural issue with the population right now, and we just have to wait till we get the boomers out of the way. Then it'll kind of, things will be normal again, I guess. And then the millennials are down here, started 30 to 34 in 2016, and down to some of them to 15 to 19. Now the 20 to 24, 25, 29 are a little deceptive in there, because we have a ton of those people at the University of Delaware. About 60% of them from out of state. They go to school here, and they'll be here for 5, 6 years. So they're not actually all going to be Delaware residents and so forth. So there's a little bit there, and they're all millennials. So that's part of the reason that big group, once again, is going to be moving through this thing and out of the labor force. So it means we're going to actually have a shortage of labor in the state of Delaware. It's not just here; it's everywhere. What's the answer for that? More immigration, I guess, because it's very hard to do any other way to do it. And once again, basically, yeah.
How much, since you mentioned immigration,
Yeah.
not the immigration from other states, how much of that is driven by younger graduates at the University of Delaware moving out of state to find work, and people from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York retiring into Sussex County?
Well, we know what those numbers are. You know, it's about 4,000 a year is the number for that are going down to Sussex. Yes, we lose a lot of the people. University of Delaware is a big school for the size of the state, obviously, 21,000 students. So they do get up and leave, most of them, because we don't have the kinds of jobs necessarily that they want to have. And I have to tell you, the millennials are a little different kind of group of the kinds of things that they want to do, what they want to, quote, experience. They're not into buying houses. They're not into buying cars. They're the Uber people. Find Uber and you'll find a millennial. And I'm not making fun of him. I make fun of one of my guys that works for me, though. He's the only millennial I got, so I have to torque him up a bit every day. So now, I showed you this graph before, right? This is the income thing. Now, where are the millennials, not the millennials, where are the boomers now? They're on the right-hand side of that blue grid, with the incomes declining. They're not going to be buying as much stuff as you can, as the green line shows you. The wages and salaries are obviously are declining even faster because they have a fairly big gap between the blue line and the yellow line, and basically that's because they're mostly dependent on pensions and that sort of thing. Well, basically, if they stop spending money like they have before, that reduces what we call aggregate demand. Once again, it has it causes you to have basically a slowness in the overall economy. I'm not sure there's anything, if we could import some more millionaires or something or other, or whatever. I have no idea how you make that up. But that's what you're facing. And there's very little you can do about it. There's not something the General Assembly can declare that would be renewable resources or something of that sort. So, and you can see that here. If you look at the top line, the 65 and over, it's a continually increasing number. And if you look at the bottom line, the 0 to 19 group, it's almost flat through 2050, 232,000 people. It puts you into an age-dependency gap that you don't necessarily want. There's more people in those two at the bottom and top group than there is in the two of the groups in the middle. Almost. I think 6, not quite. But it's a high dependency ratio. And the other, but I wonder what, there's two other things that are going on here. The first thing basically is declining labor force. I've got about 5 minutes here, and I'll be done. We have a declining labor force because of the boomers. That's one problem in terms of GDP growth. Because part of the equations on this, how many people you got that are available to work? It's the labor force. Employment thing varies over time. Another thing is what the skill levels are of people. Well, you can see right now that back here in the beginning, it's hard to believe, but 1950, almost 65% of the people in the state hadn't graduated from high school. And that number, the blue, the dark number on the bottom is almost out. So it's not an area where we can say, well, we can go educate that. Well, maybe they're getting a degree or a diploma, but maybe they didn't learn anything. But so that's a slightly different issue. So as a result of that, we were getting better skills over time as education was more widely distributed. And then, and you can see also the 16-plus group was growing as well, but not as maybe not as fast as some would have. But the idea that the Governor Markell had was that everybody should get a college education. If they did, we'd all be broke. I mean, seriously, issue that is a major issue. Now, I'm sure this is an interesting curve for you. It looks like a drunk driver or something, but if you look at this is what the labor productivity number, and that labor productivity depends on what the skills are, the people that you have, the training, and that sort of thing, and the technology. Well, in this particular case, if you look at 1995, where it hit a bottom, and then we took the dot-com boom. Remember about the dot-com boom? You've got technology on top of technology on top of technology, and being added to the productivity of labor, and up till 2005. What happened in 2005? The bottom dropped out. They can just say, I'm not going to invest anymore here because I don't see where this is going. Then in 2009, when we started to recover, we got another bounce upward. And then 2012, it went straight down again. And now what we're seeing, it's bouncing around between 0.5% growth and 1% growth. Back here in some of these other areas, we were looking at 3 and 4 and 5% growth. So when they say that the GDP is going to grow over 2%, they're kidding you. We don't have the labor force to support that, number one. And number two, we're not getting the investment levels that we want because that aggregate demand that I was talking about is falling because of the boomers. So at least that's my analysis anyway. And you can see how businesses run for cover in 2009. And they just cut all of their basically investment in businesses at that time and pull the rug over their heads and say, well, we come out with something changed. But it seems like it's improved a little bit. And then my two favorite curves are basically on this overall. We're talking about in-migration, net in-migration. That's the green line, is net in-migration. So you can see there in 2007, 8, 9, we had actually 2007 was the peak, and we had over 15,000 people, almost 15,000 people moving here every year. Okay? And then what happened? Bottom drops off. Migration drops off. And then what you got, the totals are about 8,000. So they basically almost cut our growth rate in half, which has an effect on basically our GDP. And then what's the bottom line? That's natural increase. Natural increase, births minus deaths. What direction is that heading? It's heading down. And in Sussex County, deaths are already greater than births. So it's a negative net natural increase down there. And we'll be expanding from about 200, negative 200 to a little over 1,000 a year. Yes, sir?
Have we hit 1 million people yet in the city?
I'm sorry?
Have we hit 1 million folks in the state yet?
I honestly don't know. It's I talked to city council or county council about some of these issues last time, but it's I don't know. Doesn't register. They're out wanting to build another 40,000 or 50,000 houses down there. And I told them, you just wait yourself, because you're going to get a lot of estate sales and a lot of the houses you've got, because not everybody, the kids may not want to use the place. They may not even live here, be scattered anywhere. So I think we've got the same kind of issue that's going to occur in northern Newcastle County, Brandywine School District, throughout there with the boomers that are there. There's going to be a lot of empty houses because it's going from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 0. And you'll see more of that in my development. I know I can easily find 5 almost every time now. Never used to be the case. It's all the boomers' fault. That's all you have to learn from this thing. This is all the boomers' fault. I like to track this stuff, and I think I've already told you enough. The healthcare sector is where to be at this point. It just doesn't necessarily pay as much unless you're a doctor or an advanced practice nurse or something of that
What's
sort.
the reason for that?
Excuse me?
What's the reason for the health care going up so much? I never hear.
Well, old people tend to get sick.
Okay, so you're, okay, got it.
It's just that. I don't know. I feel like a rusted hulk of metal just about ready for the junkyard. So the probability of for a lot of that group is of any given year is about 30%. They'll spend at least a day in the hospital. And that's a state budget right there. I just thought you ought to know that, since you're paying the blue line and they're spending the red line. And the problem is that there's a little bit of gap in there between the red line and the... So the General Assembly down there, at least on one side, is trying to push up the blue line, and the other group has got this tugging on that red line. And guess what? Neither one of them are moving. So I think it'll be very interesting, the papers and other places you get it. And there's what you're going to look like in 2040, in case you didn't know. The boomers are you're getting rid of them. You still see the little bit of the millennial bounce up here, but they're starting to get to be old people too. And as one person said, remember I started you out with a pyramid? The pyramid is now changed into a Coke can. So it's we're very equal, pretty much equal numbers of people in each group. And the only thing that just really bothers me is this blue and pink distribution at 85 plus. Now, in my view, I think there must be a class action suit in there as a reason why there should be fewer men than women. Well, they have stupider things they do class action suits on. I'm done, folks.
One question on, you talked about quality of life and economic development.
Yeah.
And you're on DFACs, you're talking about revenue production, projections, and personal income tax and things like that. One of the things they're looking at doing now in the General Assembly is cutting funding for nonprofits, for the arts, for all of that. And it's a large economic driver in the state. I mean, it generates revenue on its own anyway, tax revenue. Some of the organizations and arts organizations right on Market Street have brought in hundreds of people from out of town. And it's something that small businesses are looking at when they are looking for a place to grow, expand, or move to. And how is that taken into account? The fact that because we have all these volunteers, we have all these nonprofits, and they're being squeezed so much that it's going to have a much larger impact on revenues coming in.
Well, the problem is there's not enough of them that vote, I guess, because that's all it would. You look at the grants part of the budget, and it's been trimmed a little bit each year over the last 2 administrations. So some people just don't see that as important. In this particular case, I know a number of people that might likely reduce their contributions in order to pay their tax bills once you get rid of itemized deductions. It's a major factor. We don't comment on that in DFAC, though. We only comment on numbers, not who gets hurt. So it's I don't know, it's going to be a real tussle. There are things that they don't want to do that they could do in a more sensible way, but they don't want just don't want to do it because it raises havoc. I've been, some personal preference, but I've been, property taxes in this state are so much lower than the other places. You go just over the Pennsylvania border, and same kind of house here, you pay $8,000 that you're paying $1,500. And I think there's some, you get a split between businesses and households, and you get some of those people from out of state. They've got those big places down in the Rehoboth. They could contribute a little. They don't pay the other taxes. So taxes, for example, Social Security is exempt in the state. Most states it is taxed. So we could do something like that. But hell, with $100 in the real estate tax causes it, the place goes up in flames. It's amazing. So, yes, sir.
Do you have any opinions on a reassessment for real estate, since we're kind of so out of date with respect to the rest of the country?
I've been working on that problem since 1970. You don't even want to hear what I think about that. I mean, it's almost a case for a class action suit. And I know a couple of attorneys around that call me every year and say, how far out of whack is that? And I look at this stuff at least once a year. I look at every sale that takes place in the state. I know exactly what those assessed sales ratios are. I do that for the schools, for each one of the districts separately. And it's criminal. But there's nothing in the law that says you have to reassess every X period of time. It just says you have to use the same type of you can't use one type of assessment on one side of a county and a different one in another county. You can't. It can be different over there. It can't be different in the same county. So each one of our counties is done in 83 in Newcastle. It's done in 86, 87 in Kent County, and 1974 in Sussex. And you get a brand new place. It's actually costs $700,000 to do it. You immediately have to, before you put it on the tax rolls, you roll it back to what you think its value would have been in 1974. That's true of every new house that's put in here. And the only way you get an increase in assessment is if you do something like put a swimming pool in, you add but it'll go back, whatever it is, it goes back to the year of assessment that's active in that county. So if they put something in the Constitution that said you had to do it every 10 years, then maybe somebody would have done it. But it's not. The majority of the money goes to the school districts because it's $700 million to go in the school districts, and it's about $3 million that goes to all the counties and the individual municipalities. So they're not really a reason to do it. Yes, ma'am.
Are there any states doing it right? Because you've been scaring me quite a bit tonight. Do you know of any states that are managing their economics better than we are, or having models that we could either duplicate or learn from?
Well, if you were talking about assessing property, you've got the state of Maryland that does it every 3 years in all of their counties. I mean, you do 1/3 of them each time. So, and the problem is the equity problem. Some places things go up faster than other places. Like Eastern Sussex certainly is going up a lot faster than Seaford and Laurel in those same kind of house. And so you get an equity problem there that needs to be corrected. We do a pretty good job on most things, but when it comes to a tussle on these, I don't know. I don't think it's a question of leadership. I think it's basically a question is we don't have the old people in Congress again that used to, would say, we used to call them the big head committee. You must, and they probably have something like that. But there was iron fists down there at that point. You got you had to herd the cats, but those people are not there anymore at the level that they were then. And it's kind of like what happens in Congress, to be honest with you, that there's too many people that have their own axe to grind at any given point in time to get it together. So. But apart from this, I can guarantee this, there will be a budget. The budget will be balanced, and it will be monitored. The only question is who gets gored for the things. Anything else? Okay, thanks. You're a good audience. Appreciate it.